name's Kristen Dooley. I'm Director of Women Against Military Madness. Just some housekeeping. Please turn off your cell phones. Bathrooms are out the door and to the right. We will be live streaming this talk, so if you prefer not to be on camera, please sit somewhere where your back is to our videographer, Carla, really over there.
Keep passing it.
I want to ask how many people here have gone to a coffee hour in the past? Oh, well, we got some newbies, that's good.
Longer than an hour.
We're hoping that this catches on, and we're giving time later for you guys to give us some suggestions for what to do. There's a sign-up sheet going around. Please keep it moving because people come in late and we can get it to them. I want everybody to sign in, not just people who haven't signed into WAMM before, just so that we can stay connected to you and send you updates. And one physical thing I want you to do, take your hand, put it up in the air, and now tuck it underneath your leg. Okay, if you have questions, wait till the end. Tuck it under your leg. We will have questions time. I just put up donation buckets. The only cost we really have for this is for all the wonderful food and coffee that people brought. So if you've got some spare change or just want to empty your wallet into one of our please do so. We're going to call this speed dating, in which each of us have 2 minutes to give you an update on the country we're covering. But to give you a general introduction, please welcome John.
Yay, John.
Could I say something first? I need bandwidth to live stream this, and so if anybody's tuned into the Cedar, could you get on a different one? I think maybe that too, right?
There are phones on too.
Yeah.
Or Wi-Fi.
The Wi-Fi. Thank you.
Get out of the Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
If you can. Oh, one more thing. This fabulous brochure with a fabulous WAMM member on the front. You can sign up to be a member of WAMM today. Please see me after the meeting. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is John Terrazas. I am originally from Peru. I came to this country almost 20 years ago, and to this part of the city at the end of 2009. Back then I was looking for to make some friends because after many years working 2 full-time jobs, I didn't know what to do with all my time because I was fired from one. And I started volunteering in my neighborhood association. Then through a friend there, I was aware that there exists this place used to call the Resource Center for the Americas. So I went there, and well, I was surprised that a place like that existed back then. I enjoy a lot the activities that they did. I met this there was a Colombian lady working there, Liliana Rivera. She was one of the staff members that used to host the coffee hours too, and some other meetings that were doing there. And yeah, she asked me if I wanted to volunteer, and I said yes, of course, right away. Yeah, that was a great experience. Unfortunately, it lasted for just a few more years. At some point I was also hosting the coffee hours, and the intercambio meetings. This was a conversation for an hour for any topic, 3 topics. People came to speak half an hour in Spanish, half an hour in English about anything. And met some friends and different organizations, social justice organizations that are here in this part of the city and beyond. Also went to the resource centers to do forums and explain their work within the community. I was kind of sad when they had to close due to I guess lack of funding and other administrative issues probably, but mainly lack of funding. Then with a couple of other friends, we tried to continue these intercambios and coffee hours. And we did it for the next year after they closed, but then one of my friends, Leticia, she got pregnant and she couldn't continue. And then my friend David, he also got a work in Bloomington, so he had to move far south, and yeah, so I remain with the well, it's intercambio, but it's not. It's actually a Spanish conversation circle that I still do until now. Every week we have a small group of people that we read mainly literature. It's not free topic, but it's short readings, and that's something that I enjoy also a lot. I hope that this first meeting is something that will encourage everybody to continue coming and spread the word among other friends, neighbors, and especially I would like to see more younger people here. I think everybody here is over 50.
Can we just ask Leah?
It's important to engage the young leaders in our community. Now they are doing a great job and leading the movements. It's their future. They finally realize that they can't just rely on the adults or the older leaders to get things done. They have to take the lead, and that's amazing. I'm very proud of this generation, the millennials. They're very smart. Thank you.
Thanks.
So, my name is Marcy Shapiro, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what was going on in Latin America. Oh, hi, my name is Marcy Shapiro. I'm supposed to talk louder. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what was going on in Latin America at the time that the Resource Center closed, and the years right before. The way we got on to having this part of it was, I don't know how I brought it up, but that I had been at a meeting in Havana where Hugo Chavez, Evo Morales, and Fidel Castro spoke, and how exciting it was for me to be there, to see all 3 of them in a small space. It was just in an auditorium in Havana. And I was saying that it was really the beginning of ALBA, which is a Bolivarian alternative for the Americas. And ALBA is the alternative to the free trade area of the Americas, which the U.S. created. So I was there because the 3 guys were there because they were working on ALBA, but they wanted to speak to this group of about 1,000 people from all over Latin America that were at a conference that was called the 4th Annual Conference of the Hemispheric Struggle Against the Free Trade Area of the Americas, which I was at, which I didn't realize how fortunate I was to be there. So at that time, it was in Latin America and Central America and South America that it was what was called the pink tide, which was a lot of left governments were recently installed in Latin American countries. It started in, I think it was 1999 when Hugo Chavez became the president of Venezuela, and Lula became, which we should all celebrate today, that Lula is free. He became the president of Brazil in 2002, and it was really an exciting time really in Latin America, very different than now, because what's happened since is that the U.S. has worked hard through the National Endowment for Democracy, through our military, through AID, to basically have coups in a lot of the countries. And like Honduras was one of the earliest ones in 2009. And they're not like coups where there's military, they're often political coups done through the court system or through the national assemblies in countries. And so it's a really different time. But ALBA had said, as its sort of focus was that the world would be a place where solidarity and not profit would be the main objective of countries. So it's something we would still like to have now, right? So I don't know, it always started with 2 countries, Venezuela and Cuba, but it soon expanded and had 12 countries. And a lot of them are Caribbean. I don't know if you all know that a lot of them are islands in the Caribbean. A lot of the Caribbean islands are quite left in their governments. And two of the countries that were part of ALBA in the beginning were Ecuador and Honduras, and they have now withdrawn from ALBA. So I don't want to, I just want to talk about a few things that came out of ALBA in that period of time. So I don't know, how many of you watch Telesur? Because it's a really great news source about what's going on in the world, and it's the South American TV station. They do it in English online, and it's out of Ecuador, but I don't know if it's going to keep staying there given the current government in Ecuador. But other things that came out of there was Petrocaribe, which is an energy sharing thing with a lot of the countries. Petrosur, which is the way Venezuela gave oil to a lot of countries. The South Bank, which provides, it's a South Bank instead of the World Bank. The Latin American Development Fund, the development of SUCRA, which is a currency for South American and Central American countries. And they really work to fight illiteracy, to develop health care, to do all the things that have sustainable agriculture, and do all the things I think we all really hope for. So this was a positive time during Latin America when the Resource Center closed, and so we need to be getting back together now, because this is not a positive time now. There are positive things happening, but it's a very volatile and difficult time now. So that's why we decided we needed to have a coffee hour again. So the first person, I don't know who the first person is.
Mexico.
Oh, yeah, show them that map.
Yes, if you have this map, pick it up and point to the country so people know.
Okay, go around left clockwise.
We're starting at Mexico,
Yeah.
moving on.
I'm Joan Allen, and I'd like to welcome you all. Mexico is the third largest country in Latin America. It's very rich in culture and resources. In the 2,000 years prior to European contact, they had more highly civilizations with the Mayans and the Aztecs than the conquering Europeans when they came 2,000 years later. You all know, so I won't go into all the border stuff about Trump's created humanitarian crises. The bright spot in Mexico is that they recently elected a leftist president, Enrique Manuel Obrador, and he supports the Global Pact for Safe and Orderly Migration and the Rights of Asylum that was proposed by the UN. 181 countries endorsed it. Of course, the U.S. didn't, as they also, Israel didn't, and Italy didn't, and 10 other countries. Mexico did a wonderful thing 80 years ago. They nationalized their resources. So that was, and they had a state-owned oil company called Pemex. Before Obrador, Enrique Peña Nieto in 2015 started auctioning off oil fields to private companies. So recently, a U.S. oil company by the name of Talos Energy discovered 1 billion barrels off the coast of Mexico. And when Obrador announced that he was planning to take back parts of Pemex to finance social programs, private banks and the IMF stopped lending. So they really boxed him in financially and boxed the country in, saying that unless he was willing to sell off more of Pemex, they wouldn't lend to him. It'll be interesting to see what happens with him. Just even yesterday, I think it was in the Washington Post, they were talking about the tragedy of that family that was killed down there, and that Obrador had a failed state because they had 17,000 that have died in Mexico in the last 6 months. Well, in the U.S., there were 40,000 last year, and these were all gun deaths. That did include some suicides, and also over 70,000 drug overdoses. So thankfully, Obrador declined Trump's help because, of course, he alone can fix anything. He wanted to come in and take care of the cartels. And the family had said, when I watched one interview they were doing with them, they said, what can we do as the U.S.? And she said, stop this appetite for drugs that you have up there and have some gun control. You know, that's what the U.S. can do. We don't need your troops. We don't need anything else. So it'll be interesting to watch to see what happens if they start sort of undermining Obrador to get the oil. So.
Carla, are you Honduras?
What? Honduras?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm Honduras.
I will come and replace for a moment.
Okay, okay. I got it aimed over there. I'll just go stand over here. Okay, Honduras. As you people may remember, in 2009, Honduras underwent a coup after having a
a quite progressive government. They were part of ALBA, as Marcy described. And this coup, which at first was not a coup under newly elected President Obama, but then he was quickly convinced by Hillary Clinton that you know, it was something we would support. So for the last 10 years, they've been under a dictatorship. There's been massive resistance in the country, which has really increased in recent months. But numerous murders and assassinations by paramilitary groups. One thing that's possibly going to change the equation is that just last week, the brother of the president, J.O.H., Juan Orlando Hernandez, right? His brother was convicted in a New York court of drug trafficking, and his brother, the president, was implicated. So, you know, there's some reason for hope in, you know, the coming months. Since I was going to talk about Cuba, I'll just do that now as long as I'm here. So, people know that Cuba, of course, overthrew its U.S.-backed dictatorship in 1959, and ever since then, our government has been trying to grab it back. Even though Cuba, with its experiment, basically in the Western Hemisphere, of a new way of you know, helping the people rather than exploiting them, has brought superb health care, literacy, and education to the populace, and has also sent brigades all over the world to, you know, aid with health care. And briefly, in the last year of Obama's administration, there did start to be a warming of relations. Not that we should have any illusions that Obama was in favor of that socialist experiment. He just, you know, decided that it was stupid to be so obviously in the minority of world opinion. Just last 2 days ago, the UN voted again for the umpteenth time to condemn the blockade, U.S. blockade against Cuba. 3 countries voted in favor of the blockade, the U.S. and Israel, as they always do, although the U.S. did abstain 1 year after Obama had started to warm relations. Brazil joined this time, which was, you know, one indication of where their government is at. So, and the other thing that's happening now is that Cuba is being sanctioned, not just for being Cuba, but for trading with Venezuela. So the sanctions continue to increase, and of course our rights as U.S. citizens to travel are being impinged upon, because although you can still travel to Cuba, it's being more and more made more and more difficult. So hopefully things will change, but again, Cuba is under attack. So
the next one is Nicaragua. The current president is Daniel Ortega. After the Nicaraguan revolution resulted in the overthrow of the Somoza family dictatorship in 1979, the Sandinista government launched social reform policies in support of land reform, wealth distribution, literacy program, and health improvements. Because the U.S. supported Somoza before the revolution, President Reagan, along with the CIA, began financing, arming, and training rebels, some of whom were former officers from the Somoza National Guard as anti-Sandinista guerrillas. The Contra War claimed 30,000 lives. In 2019, the government continues to move forward on many fronts despite the U.S.-backed attempted coup in 2018. The government has worked with the UN Food and Agricultural Organization and UNICEF to begin restoring the forests, creating ecological parks, and promoting economic and social policies for children. U.S. intervention continues in Nicaragua with the Nicaraguan Investment and Conditionality Act passed by Congress and signed by Trump in December of 2018. The legislation imposes economic, financial, and commercial sanctions on the country. Currently, food prices are rising and certain medications are more limited, while poverty rates have been decreasing in the last 10 years. According to UNICEF, we can be certain that misery will increase for the Nicaraguan people because of the U.S. sanctions and policies.
So I'm on to one of Trump's shithole countries. And one becomes a shithole country if you are primarily, the population is of African descent. So I guess that's a definition, I don't know. But Haiti is a really important country to all of Latin America. I think it's really important that people know that, because Haiti had a slave rebellion that started in the late 18th century and they overthrew the government of France in 1804. And it was the first black republic in the world. And Haiti was a really affluent country during this period of time. They were the main sugar producer of the world, and so to see what's happened to Haiti over the years is kind of incredible, because it's definitely the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. So one of the reasons that it got poor was that France in 1825 decided that they demanded that Haiti pay reparations to the slave owners who had lost their property in the slave rebellion, and that there's no slave owners anymore in Haiti. And they were in 1825 they were asked to pay $1.5 million. It actually ended up being $40 billion that Haiti had to pay to France for these reparations. And I don't know how many, are a lot of you aware of that, about the reparations? So it's a kind of horrible thing. So the U.S. from the rebellion, the slave rebellion, has had a hand in Haiti ever since. We were really concerned that the slave rebellion would spread to the United States, and it's many years till the Civil War ended in the U.S. But the U.S. really wanted to make sure that people who were slaves in the United States didn't catch on to the idea of what happened in Haiti. And it actually literally became a colony of the U.S. from 1915 to 1934. It's had a really rocky history. There have been only 3 times that presidents of Haiti were democratically elected. 2 of them were Aristide, and one was René Préval. And Aristide, who was a progressive president and tried to do things like have education and increase the literacy rate, was overthrown by efforts by the United States. I want to say that in this period of time, the Clintons were really involved in Haiti, and they were involved in the overthrow of Aristide twice, but also tried to bring him back when they couldn't get any stability in Haiti. But one of the things about it was that they tried to bring him back by putting all sorts of rules on what he could do. For example, privatizing education, privatizing water, privatizing natural resources, all the things that really destroyed countries. And when he came back, he didn't agree to a lot of the things. He didn't enact them, the privatization, and so there was another coup in 2004. I was actually in Haiti just a few months before the coup, and there were people shooting on the streets, and it was really scary. I mean, it was really an odd time. I didn't realize that the coup was coming. So I would say that if you're paying attention, that Haiti is in a state of incredible turbulence now. For the last 16 months, there have been protests on the streets. In the last 8 weeks, 42 protesters have been killed, 86 have been injured. And the protests are based on the current president. I guess just to say that Hillary Clinton picked the last president who was Sweet Mickey Martelly, who was a body dancer in nightclubs before. But he was also part of the Tonton Macoots of Duvalier. And so the current president, Moise, is it Moise, is that how you say it? Is a disciple of his, you know, sort of, Sweet Mickey mentioned him. And so he doesn't really know what he's doing. He's young, he doesn't have any experience in government. But the protests are about him leaving because of the corruption. He stole a lot of the money that Venezuela gave through Petro Caribe to Haiti, huge amounts that were supposed to be used for social things like education and sustainable agriculture, and instead he stole the money, and there's also just a huge food shortage in Haiti, and so those two things, it's my time, yeah. It's hard to talk about Haiti in a short period
You're
of time.
taking over the speed dating.
Right. So I just want to say to please watch what's happening in Haiti now, because it's very frightening.
Puerto Rico.
Oh, that's me. Hi, I'm Mary Jean Babcock, sometimes known as MJ because we get really testy about that second name. You know, it's either Joan or Jane, or so if any of you are a Joan or a Jane, I'm sorry, but MJ works. Puerto Rico, one of the things that I think we're going to see throughout all the presentations is the effect of climate change on all of these countries. So when they start talking about climate change not being a real thing, we have all these countries to show, oh yeah, it is. And the other thing is, with the intervention of the United States, they all have their little Mickeys, you know, that are hanging in there from the United States. And also, there are people in the United States that still don't realize that Puerto Rico is the territory of the United States. They still ask for visa and immigration status for people when they're, you know, just buying something as simple as cold medicine at the drugstore. People have been asked to show their immigration status. It's like, really? And so that also, even though it's been more than 2 years after the Hurricane Maria, they still have not received all of their funds. And one of the reasons why is that HUD officials said that they were holding on to some of the money because of the alleged corruption and fiscal irregularities, as well as Puerto Rico's capacity to manage these funds. And you know, there's also been a study, I think, by the University of Michigan that says Texas, what was I going to say? Texas and Florida, I think, have received all of their money, except Puerto Rico isn't, and they weren't listed on the plan to show how the disbursement was going to be handled. The other reason is that Wall Street has a hand in all of this, you know, mine is going to be really short because I know that many of you are really well versed on the problems in Puerto Rico and the fact that Wall Street, you know, is still handling a lot of that money. So it works really well. And then finally, the other thing that we see too are the not only the turbulence, but how uprisings can happen and how they got rid of their past governor. And now Wanda Valdez is now the second woman, I believe, to be governor of Puerto Rico. However, she does say that she wants to work with Trump to make sure that they get all of their supplies and the money and the funds for their needs. It's also another place where we see an uprising of the people to say, no, we are not going to take this. And so their little dictator got overthrown, which is why Wanda Valdez is now their governor. And if there are questions that you have, we'll have a period afterwards. But I figured this one could be short and sweet. So thank you.
Brazil.
Oh.
Brazil.
Oh, I see which way. Can I read? Oh. Well, as Marcy said, the great news is that Luna has been released, and they passed a resolution saying that anyone who is still waiting for their trials or retrial or whatever would be released from prison. And I am just astounded by the lack of coverage in the United States. One of the things, Glenn Greenwald, who is a journalist who lives in Brazil with his partner, went after a lot of the corruption. And this might be familiar to us all, I mean, because we should have a real warm, fuzzy feeling about Brazil because of how much it's like our very own United States and our president. And I lost my train of thought. Maybe I should keep better notes. Anyway, so Bolsonaro is I cannot say his name correctly for all this time. I tried.
Yeah.
Yeah, just say
It should be butchered.
We know.
Yeah, thank you.
Bolsonaro.
Excuse me,
Bolsonaro.
and I forgot when I was talking about Puerto Rico, you know, they don't need the aid money because they all have paper towels. And you know that, yeah, from our president. So, you know, they're taken care of. All they need are paper towels. So in Brazil, he's known as the Trump of the tropics. And he has just so many of, I mean, it's just like home. He's misogynistic, he's, you know, every phobia, homophobic, everything, you know, that we're used to is happening in Brazil. And oh, by the way, he and Trump are like that. So one of the things, and the other thing is that with the fires in Brazil, they still, what was it? In 2019, Amazon rainforest wildfire season saw a year-to-year surge in fires occurring in the Amazon rainforest within Brazil, Bolivia, and Paraguay, and Peru during the last year. And one of the advocates for forest protection was just killed a couple of weeks ago, and he was ambushed by illegal loggers. And don't say it again. Bolsonaro. Thank you. Thought this was, you know, just fine. Another thing that is going to sound familiar, is that instead of going after the corruption in the country and responding to Glenn Greenwald's articles about the corruption in the country, he went after Glenn Greenwald, which many of you are shaking your heads and you know. And it went to court, and so the decision was, where did I write that down? Was that they could no longer, oh, here it is. The decision was that any attempt to investigate journalists for their reporting would constitute an unambiguous act of censorship and would violate Brazil's constitution. That's the other thing that Bolsonaro. Just have this.
Just say B.
B. Okay, B works. B works. And again, it's like the United States. It's like, no, don't go after the issue. Go after the person. And one of the things that I have found kind of disturbing is that every now and then I go into Fox News. I mean, that in itself is disturbing. But the fact that they cover more of a multitude of issues and topics, and I'm sure that's probably because they don't dare cover the things going on with Trump. However, what I've noticed about MSNBC, CNN, some of the other ones, they are so focused on Trump that they don't even take a look at what's going on in other countries. And I was just shocked that we didn't hear more about the fact that Lula was released from prison. So I think, as Marcy had mentioned too, that our press does not fully cover the news and what's going on in other countries. And so I'm really glad to see all of you, but of course all of you are the choir. So pass the word to listen and get involved in these countries and what's going on. Thank you.
Even the choir needs choir practice.
Yes. And that's going to be called the resource coffee, kind of the coffee session. So please stay tuned.
Literally.
Yeah.
Argentina. John, are you Argentina?
Oh, yeah. Hello again. I'm going to talk a little bit about the situation in Argentina. Such a rich natural resource country. It's really sad to learn that over the years since the born of the Republic, of the Argentinian Republic, it was seized by this oligarchy that led the independence wars. It bore in debt, and never they were never able to get rid of, or it was a constant issue over their years. Argentinians in the west, or in the west region of the country, are mainly indigenous, close to the Andes mountains, but they were never actually be considered part of the main economic policy or the developments that were thought on the government in Buenos Aires, which is in the eastern part of the country, in the Atlantic Ocean. So right now, Argentinians are having as the same as other countries like Chile, Ecuador, big uprising in the people among them. They are hoping that this new government of the Peronists, the party that was founded by General Perón, when it's going to resume the public policy in favor of the workers and more national, with a national, in favor of the national interests of the country. Just to say that Argentina is used to be back in the 40s. They got rid of the illiteracy. It was the first country in South America, in Latin America, to get rid of the illiteracy with the education program of this writer Sarmiento. Then its main commodities were wheat, beef, hide, all these derivates from the big pampas, Argentinians. It's a blessed, or used to be a blessed soil that don't need much work to just clean every time after harvest, and then crops born again. Then the situation with the economy that Argentinians are suffering now is because the model, the neoliberal model that was implanted in the country in the 70s with the coup d'etat that was reinforced with the coup d'etat of 1976. They stopped the industrialization process that was, the goal was to replace imports with a national industry. That was done during the 50s, 60s, the government of Perón. But then changed the perspective, and the market economy didn't want any more of that. So the price of their commodities went down. They couldn't sell the same price, and again the oligarchy decided to stop that process and just open the national market to the investors. But that was only like a speculation economy to buy stocks in the market, not actually to create any other productive machinery.
Bolivia.
Okay. So just to look at your map, Bolivia is the only landlocked country in South America. Just a little piece of little.
Did you say Peru?
Bolivia.
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 We could not hear you.
Okay. So it's the only landlocked country in South America, but that's not neither here nor there. So it was at one time the poorest country in Latin America, and And it has changed significantly since Evo Morales was elected. Evo Morales has won election in Bolivia for 4 times. He was the first indigenous president in Bolivia, and Bolivia has a high indigenous population, so it was a really good thing. And he had been an organizer of cocoa farmers and kind of an organizer before he became president. 2 important things happened under his watch, which one was that the economy grew incredibly, and he worked to diversify industries in the economy, and so the economy is in much healthier, one of the strongest economies in South America, and the decrease in poverty really transformed the country. Poverty went from 66% of the people to 39% of the people. And extreme poverty went from 45% of the people to 17% of the people. So it's a really incredible change. One of the reasons the economy changed was before he came into power, Bolivia was really dependent on the IMF, the World Bank, foreign aid. It really didn't develop as a country on its own. And he worked to nationalize industries, agriculture, resources. And this year, at the beginning of 2019, Bolivia now has a total free healthcare system. Better than the U.S.
Go figure.
But since then, the National Endowment, since he's been in power, the National Endowment for Democracy has spent millions and millions of dollars of U.S. funds in opposition to Morales and trying to undermine him. And since his recent election, which he won with a 10-point lead, so think about a U.S. president winning with a 10-point lead. The opposition said that it was corrupt and fraud and that he didn't really win, and so since the election they have set fires to lots and lots of buildings, healthcare centers, voting centers, the movement toward socialism, which is his party, their campaign headquarters. They've attacked people, they've raided telecom offices. Evo Morales, his helicopter crashed a few days ago, and they're not sure if it was done by the opposition or if there was something wrong with the helicopter. So the social movement, and it's a youth paramilitary group that's marching around setting the fires in the opposition. And the social movements in Bolivia have been marching against this opposition, but I think it's really important to pay attention to what's happening. This is a kind of usual plan of action, like in Nicaragua or Venezuela, what they're doing in Bolivia, and so I think it's important to pay attention to what's happening there. I just want to tell you one story about the opposition. Yesterday, in the city of Vinto, I think, I don't even know where it is in Bolivia, they kidnapped the mayor, Patricia Arce, who's a member of the movement towards socialism. They threw a can of red paint all over her, cut off all her hair, took her shoes off, dragged her through the streets, basically tortured her. And all along she said, "I will not change," which is great. So she's a hero. And, but it's that kind of violence that's happening in Bolivia right now, so pay attention.
Chile, Argentina, Chile.
Yeah, yeah. The kind of violence that is happening all around the big cities in Latin America has a root cause. Is rejection of the neoliberal model that it's been imposed in the region for the last 40 years at least. So, for example, Chile. Chile, after 50 years of uninterrupted democracy, in 1973, Pinochet did this coup d'etat supported by the CIA, the U.S. State Department. The story you know, everybody well known, is documented. So with the government, with the short government of Salvador Allende, Chile took the lead along with Cuba back then in leading the people of Latin America towards socialism, to a more justice system. But immediately after the winning of Salvador Allende, the State Department and all the corporate oligarchy in Chile and their commercial partners in Argentina also start plotting for to depose the president, and they succeed in doing that in 1973, as everybody knows. Since then, Chile was the economy was directed away from all the socialist reforms that the government of the Unidad Popular Unit was doing, and they actually hired the famous Chicago Boys, these economists. They were the pupils of Milton Friedman with the neoliberal ideology or theory that were imposed for the first time in Latin America in Chile. So they practically privatized everything except for water, and well, Chile doesn't have oil reserve, but they have the biggest reserve of copper in the world. So, and they developed big agro-industry, especially viticulture, wine making, paper mill, but at the cost of flattering all the pines, all the vegetation that is on the southern part of the country. Right now, Chile, especially the big city of Santiago, is one of the most polluted in the world, along with Mexico, the DF. But Chile, the people, the Chileans, the population is one of the most aware, political aware of the whole continent. They know their rights. They are very well educated, and now they are in their third week of protest. Demonstrations. They are not going to stop until the government call for a new constituent assembly that they are protesting because the constitution was made by Pinochet, and with this neoliberal intention to just serve the market economy, the international market economy. So they are going to continue until the government calls for a new constituting assembly, and I think they are going to succeed.
All right, I'm doing Venezuela. Most of you know a lot about Venezuela. You've been following it. Well, I'll just quickly do this. The U.S. has been trying to, as you know, to overthrow the government of Venezuela since the election of Hugo Chavez, now 21 years ago. Because from that day on, he and the people of Venezuela moved out from under the heel of the U.S. domination and began to use the profits of the enormous wealth. I think they have the second most reserves in the world from oil to make life better for the people. Great gains have been made in literacy, there's a theme here in some of these countries that move toward a socialist model. Great gains were made in literacy, eradication of poverty, in housing. 2.5 million new houses were built in the last 5 years. I mean, our homelessness is increasing, but they've built houses in Venezuela. Healthcare on the Cuba model, and in human rights. This is all known as the Bolivarian Revolution. When Chavez died in 2013, the U.S. doubled down on regime change, including economic warfare, sanctions, and almost complete embargo, stealing Venezuela money, many U.S. engineered blackouts, electrical blackouts, and military actions. The screws continue to be turned regularly, and these acts of war are having an effect. According to one report, 40,000 people have died, many because of the lack of medicines. They can no longer import they could pay for them because they got the money, but they can't import essential medicines, including chemotherapy, drugs for dialysis, and heart drugs. Last January, an unknown and minor Venezuelan politician, Juan Guaido, with total U.S. support, announced he is a legitimate president of Venezuela. But his attempts to rally support have fizzled. In April, he attempted a coup, but it fizzled in hours. And we've heard this before, not surprisingly, the U.S. mainstream media has taken up demonizing Maduro and this is all they do, and beating the drums of regime change. The media does not talk about U.S. aggression and sanctions, and doesn't talk about the overwhelming support of the Venezuelan people for the Bolivarian Revolution and for the Maduro government. After the failed attempt in April, the U.S. administration expelled the Venezuelan ambassador and staff from the embassy in Washington. On the invitation of the Venezuelan government, activists went into the embassy to protect it until an agreement could be worked out with the third country to be the caretaker. The activists called themselves embassy protectors, and for 20 days they were there and hundreds of supporters were outside, and they did bring some attention to the U.S. intervention in Venezuela. At the end, 4 remained and were arrested, charged, and faced 1 year in prison plus a $100,000 fine. Just last week, Max Blumenthal, a journalist who has revealed the deep and dirty ties between Juan Guaido and the U.S. government, was arrested in a SWAT-style operation on totally trumped-up charges. So, obviously, it's a great beacon of hope. Along with Cuba, continues to be an anchor of the pink tide in South America. And the balance of forces seem to be changing once again in a good way. All right, Ecuador.
Ecuador. That's me. I'm not an expert, and I'm going to be very short. So Ecuador also had a pink revolution, and I think the first time it hit the mainstream media here was when Ecuador offered Julian Assange refuge in the embassy. Ecuador is on left coast, west coast, and is also largely indigenous population. They had this president who was making progress away from U.S. hegemony, and then he was strongly encouraged not to run again, and he asked his vice president to take over. The vice president did take over and quickly became just like Mr. B and other people, just flipped and started inviting in the IMF and all other organizations. Ecuador is the one country that accepted IMF austerity changes and also went to, they got rid of their currency and went to the American dollar. So the IMF told them to institute all these changes. So what the IMF is this incredibly rich people sitting in a room telling other people, don't have anything, don't get anything, and living in a way that they could not possibly survive in. What is unfortunate, just on October 13th, is led by the indigenous movement. There were massive demonstrations in the streets. They tried to raise the price of diesel to what was about 12% of people's income to 25% of income. And the very first people to object were the transit workers, and we have retired transit workers here who understands that that can have a real effect. And it did. Massive demonstrations in the streets, and on October 13th, the president was forced to go back on it and reinstate the subsidies for oil, for transportation. So it's looking good so far. Again, as we say, keep in touch. There was a success just recently, and we'll see what happens next. And that is our speed dating. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I now want to open it up to questionings, and also considering the buckets around, we just pass them around. Yes.
Well, I have a question. I want to know kind of the difference of status between territory. I mean, is territory, do they want to be a territory? Is it to their advantage, or that and state, or what is territory status?
Colony.
What did you just say?
Colony.
Oh, yeah, colony. Yeah, I think, again, there are people who want to remain a colony, you know, and others want to become a state. So I don't know what the popular view is.
But is it to their advantage? Who benefits?
I'm not sure. What should someone else say? Because they should be getting everything that we're getting, and they should be getting aid. And who knows if they became a state, if they would still have that kind of coverage from the United States, even if they are part of a state. I don't know about that.
But Argentina, there's a very strong independence movement in Puerto
very
Rico. I mean, that's kind of what the masses, not statehood.
Right. And one of the things too that I've noticed in all of the talks is that the demonstrations, primarily by young people and people wanting, you know, things to change, has had a really great effect on the governments of those countries. However, here in the United States, we have a number of demonstrations, but we don't have any kind of backup from Congress, for the Republicans and from Congress to do anything about it.
Slip in 2 cents worth about Honduras?
Sure.
Okay, 2 cents, no. Well, I had worked down there in the late 1960s, and when I went down there, I was pretty blinded. I mean, I was a true American patriot. And while I was there, I did notice that I was in La Ceiba, which is a coastal city, and at that time the military came down, the U.S. military came down, and isn't that nice? But what they did was they took the people on the coast, the Honduran people on the coast, and lured them to be in the middle of this country, and they would give them, they said they could have, what do you call it, TVs and microwave ovens and all this stuff, if they go back there. And of course, that sounded real good to them. Of course, no place to plug anything in, but they had all that good stuff. And then the military took the coastal town of La Ceiba. So it was really an enlightenment to me to see what had transpired. With my own eyes, I saw that we pushed them back and took over the coastal town of La Ceiba. So it's been going on.
Yeah.
But that was my enlightenment anyhow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm even more enlightened now. After today.
Yes, you are.
By the way, I have a list of alternative news sources here that I'm going to pass around. Unfortunately, I didn't get time to put the URLs on here, but these are all online sources, and please help yourself to one. Sue?
A couple comments. Venezuela has actually the largest reserve of crude oil in the world. I just was reading the 2019 statistics yesterday. And it's about 30 billion barrels, but a lot of it is offshore in the islands. And so that's Venezuela, then I think Saudi Arabia is next, then Canada, then surprise, surprise, Iran and Iraq. So, and then the other thing, I don't know, did you get on your list, Kristen? Rick, are you still here?
I'm still here.
The Porto Vermelho is
I don't think I do.
Rick, will you talk about it briefly?
Well, Porto Vermelho is a website of the PCdoB. There's 24 parties in Brazil. The PCdoB is the Partido Comunista do Brasil. It's a very large party. They have senators, governors, city council members, congressmen, and they're in coalition with the Workers' Party, which is Lula's party. And it has, I find it to be one of the best sources of objective information what's going on.
Can you spell that?
It's P-O-R-T-A-L.
What's it again?
P-O-R-T-A-l. Vermelho is V-E-R-M-E-L-H-O.
M-E-L what?
M-E-L-H-O.
H-O. Did they have an English thing, I take it?
Yeah, they'll translate it for you. And you got to be careful because some stuff doesn't translate well, and you, what are they really trying to say? So there is sometimes a little bit of difficulty. I did want to say a couple other things. That Brazil discovered oil about 4 or 5 years ago that is 2 miles deep off the coast of Rio. And it's the largest oil find since Kuwait in 1973. So there's a lot at stake.
Well, my question is, I've known about, followed your group for years, thanks to my friend Sarah,
Your cousin.
my cousin, my enlightened cousin, and then I go back into the world with my friends from high school, and we have lunch, or nobody knows anything about what you're talking about.
It's on purpose.
And I've known this, and I just want to share quickly an anecdote. When I was just out of college, I went to France for 5 months in 1982 to try to learn more French. And I was in Nice, and that was right during the Cannes Film Festival next door on the Côte d'Azur. And that year, the Jack Lemmon film, Missing, won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. Everyone all over Europe was talking about it. They already had a lot of anger against America about things that we didn't even were aware of, really, like our human rights situation abroad. And I came back in and no one had seen this movie. And I assume you've shown it in your film festivals at one point or another. But I just thought that was interesting. My question is, with all of your collective wisdom, what is one thing that we could try to do to make, we can't change the whole American media, we can't even change much of it, but what is the one thing that could help to bring some of these ideas into the popular discourse, especially among millennials and people who are younger, through the internet or something? Is there a new kind of media structure that can do this? Because it sure isn't I mean, things like what happened in Brazil yesterday were in the Washington Post, but then the Washington Post also thinks that Venezuela is a dictatorship. So I just wanted to ask you all that. What is the, I mean, we have things like Democracy Now! And so forth, but what can be done to reach a broader base of people?
I have the answer. Yay! And if you pay me money. I think that every organization in the country, you know, that's been an organization historically is struggling with reaching out to younger people because ways of communicating have changed, and I don't think anyone has figured it out yet. And so I don't know, but I think social media, but probably not necessarily Facebook, which is what I use because I'm old and young people aren't on Facebook as much. So
can I weigh in on this? So as a 51-year-old, I look at a lot of data about how there's a real shift in media and thinking. And just as an example, after the Democratic debate in the first week of August, it had about 10 million viewers on some corporate-backed media outlet. Later that week, Bernie Sanders went on the Joe Rogan show. And if you're over age 50, there's very little likelihood that you know the Joe Rogan show. Now this is a rather enlightened group. You might.
If you're on Twitter, you would know.
If you're on Twitter, you might. But Joe Rogan is an interviewer. He did an 1.8-minute interview with Bernie Sanders.
Millions.
Got 10 million views. Yeah. So as many people saw this 1.8-minute uninterrupted. And so there is a shift going on, and I'm not really sure that we should assume the young people don't know.
That's where they're getting it.
That's where they're getting, and most recently, Edward Snowden was again on the Joe Rogan. It was 2 hours and 49 minutes, and you think, who has the attention span for this? Right. It has over 10 million views within a week or two, and they do a podcast. Right. So there's a lot of different media outlets like that. And I don't know what the kids are doing with this information, but I think they're actually gathering it.
Yeah.
Well, I think an attempt right now to connect the dots between the climate justice movement and inequality and American foreign policy is so powerful because there's a lot more people maybe paying attention to the climate movement, and then from that maybe getting into more peace and justice kind of issues. And I just wanted to mention one anecdote, if we're sort of sharing. I like the idea. My name is Rebecca Kramer. I like the idea of using these forums, these Saturday mornings, to share information. And I know that Marcy included the Witness for Peace Upper Midwest group as part of the co-sponsors. And when I went to Haiti in '91, it was with Witness for Peace, so I'm kind of still partial to keeping up with them. And every once in a while, it's a small group in the upper Midwest, but every once in a while they have a really good talk. And recently they brought in a guy, we didn't talk about Colombia today, but recently they brought in a peasant leader who grows coca. And he's now head of a group of coca growers in Colombia. They grow coca, poppies, and marijuana. And of course the new government of Colombia says they're going to eradicate coca growing. So these people get it from both sides because the government, they were supposed to give them money and capital to change what they grow, and of course that's not happening. So they're left out in the the lurch because it's illegal to grow coca, but they're not getting the money to change it. And even when they do, there's no other crop that can give them the livelihood that coca does because there's no roads to take their. Even if they grow coffee, they can't get it to market. Whereas the coca, next level up in the hierarchy of making cocaine and exporting it, will come to them and get the leaves. Anyway, then the cartels are also on their case because they want them to keep growing coca. So anyway, it was kind of a interesting story from this peasant leader, and I just wanted to give a plug for Witness for Peace Upper Midwest, and they had the talk at C-Tool, and I know that we're all kind of aware that there are some new players since the Resource Center ended. The C-Tool is an excellent thing, and then there's also this group of the people following the caravans, the solidarity with the caravans, and I know Marcy's part of that too. So I just think it's a great time to pull together and share resources because there really is a lot going on in the Twin Cities.
Anybody else that hasn't talked yet?
I talked, I didn't mean to talk yet.
Okay, throw your arms up again. MJ?
I was kind of wondering the same thing. I'm sorry, what is your name?
Edge.
Edge. The edge.
I did find out I need hearing aids. I just haven't gotten them yet. So, because I'm one of those people who, has a little bit of knowledge about a lot of things, but I don't know a lot about the countries that many of you have visited and know about. And I wondered too about how to, engage other people. And I'm wondering, I mean, some of these things like Joe Rogan and some of those shows are really great in getting information generally, but how do we get younger people here in this group? That's where I'm trying to think of. And I don't know if you go to some of the candidate leading headquarters and say, gee, can we send out an email to your list about this group? Or, because we've got the young people going for gun control and the climate. I mean, those kids are kicking ass. And we need more people and people here kicking ass and getting educated.
I did want to say that I read in the mainstream media this morning that Keith Ellison, who's Attorney General of Minnesota, is going this week to Honduras and El Salvador, and he's working on the point of that travel, which is privately funded, not funded by the state of Minnesota, is to learn about causes of immigration, or migration coming toward the U.S. southern border, and he's a well-traveled and intelligent person, and I think he's in a position to take more action than he was when he was in Congress. So I think we can use that trip of his to the advantage of the people concerned about Latin America.
Great.
Yeah, I wanted to say that, in the 75 years I've been on this earth, and starting out as a right-winger, okay, and avoiding a draft and living in Brazil for a number of years, that I've seen in South America a huge consciousness growing. Brazilian people are fairly naive, just like the U.S., okay? But there is a left movement that is much larger than any of us can imagine. They're not hiding in the shadows. They're wide open, okay? And they're growing because the situation is forcing them to grow. We are an empire. We exploit. It's for U.S. interest is corporate interest. And they don't give a rat's ass about poor people, okay? They'll drive the rest of the South America and Central America into a Haiti situation. There's no limit to what they'll do. They make alliances with the big drug dealers. They're in alliance with death squads, okay? And it's the Democrats and Republicans, okay? We can separate out 3 or 4 or 5 in Congress now that aren't with them. But for the most part, it's who we're voting for that are doing this. And we, the young people are learning. I mean, it's changing. I mean, in my neighborhood, I thought I was the only guy. And all of a sudden, it's like, geez, there's a huge amount of them. They don't even know who I am, right? And they're fighting. And I think, the whole situation is growing. And, whatever our new tactics are, try them. If they work, we keep doing it.
I just want to thank you for answering my question broadly. And I had one comment. And I thought this when I came in today. I thought, you should have these meetings by the university. I mean, if you, like the old Center for the, Resource Center for the Americas, that is one, you're next to 40,000 students right there. But
I really want to encourage people to think about social media, because I just think that that's one of the problems with people most of our age. And that it's really, I just looked up, and Joe Rogan has 7.8 million followers on Instagram, 2.3 million followers on Facebook. And he has a podcast, long podcast called The Joe Rogan Experience. And I just think people ought to be listening to those and following people like them, so we start to learn about people in a different age group than most of us. Because I really want to encourage people to get beyond what, websites and things online and go to social media, because I think it's where the future is, and I really wanted to really emphasize that. One other thing I just wanted to say is that Keith Ellison actually did go to Honduras when he was a congressman, and he, unfortunately, when you're in Congress, they limit you on what you can do when you go to another country.
He was in Gaza several times too. But
Yeah,
he couldn't do it.
yeah, they don't, like in Honduras, he was not allowed to, he went with a group with Witness for Peace, but he was not allowed to stay with them, he was not allowed to, I mean, he had to stay in
He has more independence now.
Yeah.
Can you please not talk?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just say, I'm gonna allow one more question, and because Kim hadn't talked yet, it's gonna be Kim, but please feel free to stay and talk amongst yourselves. Go ahead, Kim.
Me. Okay. Actually, it's really funny because Joe Rogan, I actually was just doing YouTubing and looking up stuff to make myself, to find things. And I just happened to run into him, and I was blown away by his podcast, so thanks for reminding me about that name. And it's true, I mean, we have to get beyond that, but maybe some more practical things to do, I should say. It's discouraging and encouraging at the same time, because depending on what site you go to, social media or Facebook, you really believe that no one really cares. But however, I think the youth climate strike was just a very good example how the youth are taking more initiative. And when they had their march, I went to pass out flyers, and I made the connection because they still believe climate change is ending plastic use, and I threw in how the U.S. military is the biggest polluter, and they didn't know. So it's a combination of a lot of things, but also noting that there is statistics saying that people in the U.S. Don't like capitalism anymore. That's also encouraging. But to make presentations on other countries, it's a clear view, like it's all about the U.S. wanting to extort resources, and no matter who's in government, if it doesn't go along, you're gone. But the protests on the streets in these countries are pushing back. So that's my little comment.
Good.
However, just one quick thing to get people more involved. I'm like going to universities. Being by universities is good, but also maybe going to high schools. I think maybe doing like co-sponsoring lectures, because people still need this information, and make those connections with other groups at high schools and college campuses, because I think certain high schools for sure would be more apt to have us. So that's another thing to think about, is hooking up with other groups.
Okay, before we go, thank you very much for coming. We had no clue if anybody except ourselves was going to be here today. It's very encouraging that you're here. Please contact the WAMM office. Email us with ideas about what you would like to do in the future. We have 3 more Saturday mornings, December 7th, January 11th, and January 25th, reserved in the space, though we will consider moving it to a more, to a different space. All options are open at this time. We very much want to hear from you. What do you want to hear about? What do you want us to focus on? What do you want us to do differently? What do you want us to do the same? We have got an exciting group of people working on this, and we are going to apply to the WAMM board to become an official subcommittee. We haven't had a chance to do that yet. But you will be hearing more about us, and please contact us, please give us ideas. And
does this room have a microphone at all?
Yeah,
it does.
It does, and we can do that next time.
Well, I think it would be helpful. I hear
okay.
Sometimes people put their head down, then you can't hear them.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Let's give a round of applause. And please remember, next Monday night we have a movie in this very room
I don't know
called
which
Harvest
one
of
you mean.
Empire, which is exactly about migrant workers. It's here at 7 o'clock, and it's free, and you're all welcome to come. Thank you.